There is a lot of talk about who was/is the best manager in history. Names that crop up often include Bobby Heenan, Paul Heyman, and of course, your good self. But who, in your opinion, is the person who doesn't get enough credit for their managerial skills? I've always enjoyed Slick, although the hustler pimp gimmick was probably vaguely offensive.
Just vaguely. You could almost see through it. It was vague. It was very opaque. Well, first of all, the only names that ever crop up in the discussion of who's the best manager in wrestling are Bobby Heenan and Bobby Heenan. And me and Heyman can be somewhere around in the top. Well, I can be in the top 5 and he could definitely be in the top 10. But, as far as, I guess Jimmy Hart really, because Jimmy to me was not, even though everybody knows him from the WWF and that's been his enduring fame, for those of us who saw him in Memphis, if he could have been Memphis Jimmy Hart in the WWF, he would probably have, given Bobby a run for his money. 'Cause there was never any manager that was as key to the success of the business of an entire territory as Jimmy was from fucking 1980 pretty much to 1984. And he was into everything, but he was up for everything. So I think Jimmy doesn't get as much credit for being as great as he was because the WWF stuff, when it changed direction, cut his time, he had a lot of top talent. But I mean, as the performer that he was and the way that things could be centered around him, he was a fucking heat magnet.
I guess, it recently came up when we talked with Dave Meltzer, Ken Ramey, just because there's not much footage of him.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the guys that you can't see anymore.
Who in your mind's the most overrated manager?
Oh God, now I got to knock somebody.
Yeah.
And let's besides, and I didn't mean to cut you off with Ken Ramey, but I was just agreeing with you, but also guys like, George Crybaby Cannon even, and Sir Clements or Steve Clements was a heat magnet in his day and was a good worker and so could bump and the umbrella was over and blah, blah, blah. And I used to think, English people, especially those British people, are just horrible people until Johnny Marlin came over and that proved that some of them are okay.
But have bad tattoos.
But had bad tattoos. Obviously, he'd been in the Marines somewhere or something. I hate to knock. There was some people that just Fuji was a top performer in the business for years as a wrestler and was a bumping machine, which is why he was broke down later on. And was he and Tanaka were a Hall of Fame tag team, et cetera, but he was not a good manager.
But he's not overrated. No one rates Fuji.
Overrated. I was just saying, goddamn, I think people pretty much smartened up to all the crummy managers, didn't they?
I think, again, it's all subjective. I went through a long period of time, and I'm not there anymore before anyone sends me angry messages, where I thought Gary Hart sucked, completely was awful. Again, never seeing his stuff in Florida in the mid-70s, obviously, and only seeing him when he wouldn't sell for the world champion, and he really didn't do much.
I can see that because for whatever reason, and I understand why he wasn't bumping around like, Jim Cornette or whatever the fuck, because he was 25 years older than me and had been in a fucking plane crash and broken everything. So that's why he was physically limited in what he could do, but he wouldn't. I just saw a Houston match of, oh God damn it. I watched it last night as I was nodding off on the couch. It was Don Jardine versus fucking, some top baby face that tried to fucking throw Gary out of the ring, and Gary just stumbled and stood up and stood his ground. The point I was making.
Yeah, I mean, that's
and
bullshit.
Flair tried to push him around. He'd stand his ground. He wouldn't sell for the baby face, but otherwise it had his promos and his demeanor and the heat he had and stuff in Florida. Yes, but I can see where, because it's, as I was working in the same company with him every once in a while, and I would watch on the monitor, and there he'd be at ringside, and I'd say, "Oh my God, Gary just broke out in a drop of sweat," because he was not the most active at ringside in those days.
Do you think Paul Jones was ever effective as a manager?
No.
Just to clear that up.
And you know, here's the thing. I'd hate for Paul to hear that now because I've seen him at the Charlotte Fan Fest and we've talked and have fun about the old days and everything. But no, Paul was a huge name in the Carolinas as a wrestler, as a both babyface and heel because he was friends with George Scott and George Scott used him well and he had gotten over there and he just stayed, probably for 15 years. And then, you know, the new era came along and the early 80s was the new era, and Paul had a bad back and just transitioned out of the ring and tried to become a manager. But I just didn't ever get Paul as a manager.
I'll give you someone underrated. And I'm not even taking into account anything he did after Smoky Mountain or the wrestler he managed in Smoky Mountain. Daryl Van Horn was extraordinary because he was kind of like, you know, the Grand Wizard in terms of speed and just intensity. And he had the fez on his head. I like him as Daryl Van Horn more than I do him as the Sinister Minister or James Vanderbeek or whatever else he was called.
James Vanderbeek.
What was his name?
I think it was James Vanderberg.
Oh, whatever. Okay, yeah, not the guy from Dawson's Creek.
That was in WCW. They did that to him, and then but James Mitchell, another of my managerial discoveries. I found Sonny and James Mitchell.
See, I like the fact that he was also upset in Smoky Mountain Wrestling that the other heel managers were getting more attention than him. I remember one time he went on TV and he called it the PTL show because he said it's all about Jim and Tammy. Which was great. I mean, that's great.
I know. I loved his shit. He's the only thing that made goddamn Mummy entertaining. I'll tell you that.
What'd you think of Richard Lee when he managed the Moondogs?
He was Larry's friend from fucking West Memphis or wherever that used to hang around with him, and they traveled around, and Richard fancied himself a country singer, and he did the Moondog song, and then later on, they gave him a whistle and said, blow this. I don't know what to tell you.
I just saw footage of him as Sir Richard Lee managing for Nick Goulas in 1986, 85 maybe.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's exactly.
See, that proves if you hang around the boys enough, you can get two favor jobs in the same lifetime.